I'm Diann Dreiling. I was born June 22nd, 1941 in Catherine, Kansas, and I grew up there. In between there, I lived in Hayes and in Chicago, but back here again. And I grew up on my grandfather's farm, but my great-grandfather came over from Russia when he was, I think, around 21, and got established here. And then he sent for his mom and his dad and his youngest brother. The rest of the relatives still stayed over there in Russia, in the Volga German area. And he ended up giving all of his kids a quarter of a section of land, and that in which my grandfather, he was named after my great-grandfather.
How did your great-grandfather end up coming over here from Russia?
I think he just didn't like what was going on over there, and he heard about the freedom over here and what he can do, and he decided to take a chance.
Okay.
And
Who did he come over with initially? Was he married when
yes, he came over with his wife.
Did they have any kids when they came over?
No, they were all born over here.
Okay, and then they got a whole section of land.
They got a section of land, and then he got a little more land because he had, I think, 11 kids. And they all got a quarter of a section, so.
Oh, all 11 kids got a quarter of a section?
Yes.
Okay. And so you grew up on the original farm?
No,
You on your grandfather's?
On my grandfather's farm. I do know where the original farm is, and that, but my grandfather didn't have that one.
So did your grandfather speak English?
My grandfather, he spoke mostly German, but he did speak English. He died when he was 65 years old, and I was in grade school, and I stayed with my grandmother, and my dad used to ask me if Grandma talked to me in English or German, and I'd say, I don't know, I just answered her in English. That's, I mean, I was so used to the German language, I couldn't really speak it. I could understand everything, and that, But when we moved on the farm, my grandfather moved his house into Catherine, and he raised 12 kids in a 2-room house on the farm. And in the summertime they had what they call a summer house, and that's where Grandma would do her cooking and everything and that. And they'd spend a lot of time in that place there because of it being hot. And when we moved there, my grandpa had workhorses yet, which he didn't use anymore, but he didn't want to get rid of them. But it was either the horses or me. And he was afraid I would get hurt, so he sold the horses. And I followed him all over on the farm and that. And Grandma, they made homemade lye soap, and they did all of their butchering and canning all of their meats and everything.
So you grew up in your grandfather's house?
No, we built a house on the farm.
Okay.
They moved that house to Catherine, and then they added an addition. They added a living room, or not a living room, a dining room and a kitchen. And then they had the bedroom and the living room, that's all.
Do you remember that house being moved? That seems like a big ordeal.
Yeah, and that, because I was around, and I also know that when they moved it, there was a lot of stuff up in the attic, and there was a teapot that my grandma had gotten from her dad the first Christmas that they were married. And my dad used to hide his money in there all the time. And it had a little chip because with moving it, and Grandma says, the chip's still there in the attic and she was going to go up and get it for me. I told her to forget it.
How did they move the house?
Well, they had a big truck with a trailer. I mean, they
Just put it on the
lifted
truck.
on there. They couldn't use the horses and that to move it. But I don't know. I just stayed with my grandmother a lot.
Okay, what was your grandmother like?
What was she like?
Yeah.
She loved children. She had a memory that was unbelievable. She could tell you what happened on the day you were born. Every single person. And that when I was dating my husband, she asked me who I was dating. I told her that Clarence Dreiling from Ellis. And she goes, oh, Barb's son. My grandmother, she couldn't get out at home because she had a disabled child, And so she was stuck at home all the time, so you wondered, how did she know all this? And she knew all about it.
So how did she know all this?
I don't know. She just, she had a memory, and that if somebody said something, and that and you could argue with her, but she was always right. Mm-hmm. I mean, her kids argued with her, mm-hmm. and she would be right in that. But she loved children, and she didn't care what they did. I mean, if they did something bad, that mm-hmm. didn't mean that you gave them up, and she was so easy to get along with.
Was that different than other people? Were other people more difficult around children?
Some of them were. Some are. They just are, I don't know, because I always said, I hope my grandchildren think of me as I think of my grandma and grandpa. And I know my great-grandfather was like that because I know what my dad thought of his grandfather. And that that he was a kind man, and he'd do anything for you.
So what sort of things did you do with your grandmother? Did you help her make soap?
No. I mostly was a pain in the ass. I talked all the time.
Yeah.
And that no, she always told me I was so much like her, and that because I love old things. Mm-hmm. I loved history, and that actually I've got a bed that her kids slept on, which had a straw mattress, and I have a lot of stuff from her, and everybody would say, how did you get that? I said, because I asked, because I loved things that meant something from my family from a long time ago, wanting to know what they did and everything. Now, I don't know how my grandpa and grandma met. I know how my mom and dad did, but I don't know how my grandpa and grandma did. And my dad used to, when he dated my mom, they had no car, and he'd ride his horse up to my mom's farm when they would have a date. And then they would go horseback riding. Because my mother was a tomboy and she loved to ride horses and that too.
What do you remember about growing up on the farm? Did you have to do any chores?
I had to go get the cattle.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a pony. I always wanted one.
Did other people have a pony?
There was other people, that had ponies, but I always wanted a pony, but my dad and mom didn't get one for me until I got married and left home. Then they got a pony. So I walked over to get the cattle, and
how far was that?
well, I don't know, it was on the other side of the quarter of a section, I mean, from the house. And it was quite a ways to walk and that. And when I took care of the chickens, the ducks,
What did you have to do to take care of them?
I had to clean their chicken house out, which is a lot of fun. And we sort of dug a little pond area for the ducks to, wade around in behind the house and help milk the cows.
Are you good at that?
I wasn't bad.
How many cows did you have to milk?
Oh, my mom and dad didn't have a lot. They just had, they had 5 that they actually milked. But I named all of them.
What were their names?
Oh, Peggy Sue, Big Red, the Guernsey. I mean, they're just different names and that, some of them we named after who we bought them from. And
What did they know that you named the cow after them?
I don't think so. And that when I moved away and I'd been gone and then we moved back here and I went to the farm and Dad still had some of the cattle, on the farm. And I would always say, oh, that one belonged to Big Red. It was down a ways and that. But Dad looked at me and he says, you remember who these calves and cows now all belong to, But I did. I just loved them. I was an outdoor person. I'd rather be outdoors helping my dad with the tractor and working and that in the field than I would with being in the house with my mom.
Did you have sisters to help your mother?
Yeah.
Okay.
At that time, I had a sister that's 2 years younger than me. And the other one was 8 years younger than me, but she was still a little kid then. And when I was home with that.
Did you have brothers?
I had a brother that came along when I was 13. And then one that came along when I got married, 9 months after I got married. I got a little brother.
Okay. And so one of your siblings was disabled and had to stay at home?
No, my
Your
dad's.
dad's siblings.
Yeah, but the talk is that someone had dropped her when she was a baby. And at that time, people didn't know about, going to the doctor and really being checked. And so she became disabled and that. But she was smart, and very strong. You didn't want to get her mad.
Okay. What sort of things did you do when you weren't at home working? Were you in 4-H or what did you do?
I did a little 4-H there for a while. And I learned to sew, do different things.
What sort of things would you sew?
Oh, actually, I made dresses. I made my brother's sports jackets and just different things. Actually, I made my mother's 50th wedding anniversary dress and that,
Wonderful. What do you remember about school when you were maybe in elementary school?
Okay, I moved from Hayes to Catherine on the farm when I was in the 4th grade. So there was quite a bit of difference because being here in Hayes, we had a big class, of kids. And when I moved to Catherine, there would be 3 different grades in one classroom. And so, it was a little different in that, but I think it was nicer, actually. You learn more.
What did you learn? School-wise? Or?
Just everything.
Yeah.
And that,
What did you think of moving from like a city to a more rural area?
I loved it.
You loved it?
I loved it. I'd do it right now if I could. that there's no place like being out on a farm and listening to the birds and the animals and that, quiet.
Okay. Were there any kids who weren't Catholic?
At that time, very few.
Okay.
And at that time, pretty well everybody was related to everybody.
Do you remember, like, how were the kids who weren't Catholic, how were they treated?
We treated them same as we did.
Mm-hmm.
We never paid any attention to whether they were Catholics or not Catholics. We weren't raised that way. My dad said, everybody is the same. Nobody is better than anybody.
That's very sweet.
Yeah, that's what he always said. He says, walk straight, don't slouch. He says, you're just as good as everybody else. He says, but you're not any better. And that, so.
Did you know people, so you had you had Volga German immigrants here, and then what other kinds of people lived in the area?
Well, in Catherine, it was all Volga Germans.
Okay.
And now, there's others living there now.
Mm-hmm. So when you were living in Hayes, you knew people with different backgrounds, but then when you were living in Catherine, it was all the same.
Oh yeah, whole different area.
Okay. Did you ever get in trouble as a kid?
Well, I'll be honest, I really didn't. I was a good girl.
That's good.
And that don't put your smile on you. No, actually, no, I didn't. I didn't. If my dad said something, and he wasn't mean or anything, but I knew, like when I was in high school, he gave me the car to drive back and forth to school, and we dragged Maine. But
Well, you would come down to. Did you go to high school in Hayes?
But he would say, I don't want anybody else driving that car. And and I've had boys that wanted to drive my car. And I told them, no way. I said, Dad says, I'm supposed to be driving it, and I'm driving it. I says, I don't want to get in trouble. And not that, I don't know why, I just don't remember doing anything bad.
That's good.